little intrigue for them. We're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. You have found your way to our professional development series every Wednesday at noon over Zoom. Same Zoom link. Show up. We'll do awesome stuff. If you can't make it in real time, we asynchronously put these available for viewing on the TLC website, so share them with your friends. Also, you do these, you can get a TLC Professional Development Certificate or even be a fellow. A couple of you have started to give us some of your materials. That is fantastic. We're excited to see those come in. If you have questions, please let us know. And my colleagues have dropped a link into the chat to find out more about that. Next week, Trina Knight from the Care Center is going to come and talk to you about the services they offer. It's going to be a really important thing because unfortunately, a lot of stuff happened to our students and we need to be able to connect them to resources to help them out. So big focus on student well-being next week from Trina Knight. Today, though, we have Dr. Cassie Jones coming to us to talk about undergraduate research, which is something that I think is a big strength of the excellent education we provide at K-State. And I'm really excited to hear Cassie Jones talk about this today. Shout out, though, originally we heard some of this at the SOTL Showcase last May. The SOTL Showcase is a showcase on scholarship and teaching and learning. This has become an annual event. So be watching for more details coming out, and you want to share your cool ideas, you can do that. And then maybe you get into the professional development series the next year to share even more of those ideas. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the things that we've been doing in animal science that I think have some really significant impacts on things that maybe could work for others within the university. Because I think that a lot of us are in the same place where we really acknowledge and understand and appreciate the role that undergraduate research can play in our in our education system and with undergraduate students. But you probably have the same challenges we do in that, it's just one more thing. And so how do you do that in a way that allows you to make progress and allows you to meet the student demand while still fostering kind of all the cool things that undergraduate research allows us to do? So I am trying to fix my display of how we're going to show it today. Hold on for me. Yeah, that should work. Is that working for you guys? Do you see the full screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So what we've been working on in undergraduate research in the Department of Animal Science is really no different than what it is in many of our departments across K-State and certainly across, just kind of undergraduate research programs and academic programs collectively. So we know the value of undergraduate research experiences. I do not have to preach to this audience about the transformational experiences that they provide, certainly an exposure to grad school, but that's just part of it. Right. And so a lot of times it's in the lab or when doing these undergrad research experiences that students have that light bulb moment and connect things that they're doing in the classroom and concepts that they've maybe heard once or twice or 20 times with, oh, this is why we learned that. And so at the same time, it really helps introduce them to mentoring. We have a wide variety of academic advising models across the institution. And at the same time, I'm always a little concerned that students, undergraduate students specifically, get exposed to 1/3 of our faculty, right? They get exposed to the teaching faculty who are phenomenal, but man, there's just some really phenomenal research faculty and extension or outreach faculty. And so how do we allow those students to gain some exposure to the mentoring process and maybe a greater number of potential mentors? And then of course, all of the professional development and skill development things that it provides. And so for us, we have an overarching goal in our department as we look at animal science. We, as a STEM field, want to make sure that our workforce is filled with people that know how to interpret data. And so we have lots and lots of science and lots of opinions that people have about, what pet food should you feed? What's the right way to raise livestock? All sorts of things. And if you Google it, there's a lot of information available. What we're trying to teach to our animal science students is not just what information is out there, but how do you dig through all that information and make some level of scientific based decision, regardless of what their occupation is going to be. You know, a lot of times people automatically go to, oh, this is kind of a grad school preparation program. Yes, it can be, and that's an important role. But a lot of times we're speaking just as much about our future veterinarians, how important it is that they understand how to read research and interpret what's good versus not as great science, so that they can be making science-based recommendations. And then likewise, as they go through the field, you know, my husband's a rancher, and many times I'll have students in class who are like, I want to go back home to the farm. Why do I need to know what research is? And so we talk about the value of understanding, being able to read through marketing claims and select the most cost-efficient and effective vaccine program for your herd. And just being able to make those science-based decisions to be able to critically evaluate research. But again, you all know that piece. We know the value of undergrad research experiences. What surprised us when we started working in this area is that students also get it. We went through about a 5-year period of time where we were surveying our foundations course, our orientation class for freshmen coming in. And we would ask them among a variety of different questions. A question that we ask is, are you interested in doing undergraduate research sometime during your undergrad career at K-State? And of course, you know, you ask any freshman if they want to do something and they're like, oh yeah, I want to do it, right? But we were still surprised. We had 78% of students at that point indicate, oh, they not only want to, but they're planning to conduct undergraduate research sometime in that next, you know, 4 years, 3.5 years that they have left at K-State. For us, that poses some really unique challenges. And I don't think that that's any different than the challenges we have in all of our departments. We only have so many faculty. And when we look at just sheer numbers of students, we have almost 900 students who are majors in animal sciences and industry. And we have a large faculty, but not even close to enough to accommodate that number of students in the one-on-one mentored relationship that we've been used to, I guess, in terms of how many of us were brought up in the scientific field of how to do undergrad research and what that model looks like. And not only do we not have a lot of faculty or enough faculty, but those faculty are already busy. And so they're already teaching, they're already doing research. And so in the environment that we live in currently, where, you know, there's never enough time, there's never enough people to get all of the things done, how do we help faculty members prioritize, and how can we incentivize them to really carry the torch for undergraduate research and allow this to be one of those experiential learning opportunities for our students? So that's kind of where we came into this, is that we knew we wanted to increase the number of opportunities available for our students in animal science. But we wanted to do that, and our challenge was to do that without detracting from other departmental resources. We didn't have any additional teaching tenths we could dedicate to this cause. We did not have a whole bunch of money we could throw toward this instead of something else. We couldn't, you know, stop teaching this class so that we can add another course in a different area. And so how do we best utilize the resources we have in terms of time and money of our faculty and still increase the number of meaningful opportunities that we could offer to students? And so we did a couple of different things. The first is we tried to eliminate as many barriers as possible so that faculty would be open to and really could mentor more undergrad researchers. And this is not brain surgery by any means. I basically, in my role as the undergraduate research coordinator, played matchmaker a lot of times. And instead of expecting that a student makes their way to find the right faculty at the right time, who has the funding and all of the things, I would be kind of that first stop for students if they were interested in undergrad research to come and visit with me. And then likewise, I was the first stop that if faculty had an interest in engaging in undergraduate research, researcher, they didn't have to blindly kind of put out a call. So we identified someone on faculty, and for a while that was me. Now it's Dr. Jessie Vipum in our department, who really is the go-to person, both for faculty as well as students. And that was making sure, as well as that matchmaking component, that our faculty themselves had what they needed to optimize the number of mentors that they could bring in, or mentees that they could bring in. Sometimes, especially with assistant professors, I was astounded by how many times financial assistance for supplies, just basic supplies, I mean, $500 of supplies was one of the biggest challenges for some of our assistant professors in terms of accepting or accommodating additional mentees. That is something that, in our case, our department had no problem covering. And especially as someone on a tenure track or a non-tenured assistant professor or instructor level, or a research assistant level, we didn't want a couple $100s in terms of supplies at the university scale budget to impact whether a student had access to undergraduate research or not. And so that was one that was relatively easy for us to solve. We also wanted to make sure that we helped the faculty member better make sure the student was completing all of the compliance requirements. And I don't understand or maybe know all of the compliance requirements and all of the fields that we have. I'll just give you a snippet of what that looks like in animal science. Just like many other fields, if we're using people for any research, we would have IRBs and different protocols and training that have to go through. On the animal side, because we utilize animals as research subjects, we have a significant amount, and I'm talking like 12 to 15 hours of online training modules that students have to go through in order to be approved to conduct research. And it's kind of like a lab-based training program, but in this case, it's working with those animals. And so that's one thing that I could help with on the kind of coordinator or programmatic side, is helping students get through that training. This is what you need to do. This is where you need to do it. Bring back to me proof that you've completed it. And then I can clear those students so that the faculty member that, or kind of research assistant who's mentoring those students doesn't have to deal with that too. And then again, mostly what I would do is match students. And so if I had a faculty member that's saying, I have this dairy project that I am looking for someone that wants to work with cows and is open to working 5 hours a week or 15 hours a week. And this is, early mornings, and this is what I'm looking for. I could then reach out to specific students who had indicated an interest in that species. And so I could play matchmaker. And also, we think that in our program that probably helped us create better matches because of that mentee and mentor personality as well. Making sure that, maybe that's an early morning, or maybe that's an expectation that the student operates more independently or less independently, depending upon the mentor's preference. Those are things that I could help make sure that we had a personality match as well as an interest match as well. And so we went through that process for about 3 years, where that was really our focus. And I'll tell you, it works, but in our case, it didn't work enough. So that was kind of this early 2013, 2014, kind of to 2016 time period. And we were able to increase the number of undergraduates that were conducting meaningful undergrad research experiences. And as you look at those numbers, it's like, oh man, we went, we had a pretty big percentage increase. We went from about 22 students on average to about 32 students on average. That's great. But again, we have almost 900 students. And what we figured out pretty quickly is that even when we optimize the model the best we can, we still are only meeting about 1.8% of the capacity using a conventional one-on-one mentorship model. And so it works. And it may be the best solution in some specific programs, but in our case, we needed a completely new model. And so we started looking at other things that other universities were doing and looking at kind of other opportunities and options. Some things that for us were non-negotiables is that we knew we needed to increase the student to mentor ratio. We just didn't have enough mentors. But we wanted to do that without diluting all of the things that come with undergraduate research, all those critical thinking components. And then we also wanted to move these transformational experiences to earlier in the curriculum. Many times our students were getting, if they got an undergrad research experience, it was, maybe as a senior. And we were hearing over and over again, oh, these are such great transformational experiences, but we wanted them to occur earlier so that if a student wanted to do a follow-up project or present at a national or regional meeting, or really even just take a class or two afterward where they can apply the skills in that application that they had figured out earlier on through undergrad research. And so we, through our different research, had come across the course-based undergrad research model. And that was one that we decided to look and explore within. And so it took us probably about 3 semesters to refine what worked for us in terms of a class and a class structure that allowed us to do an undergrad research project. But we developed a class, and in this case, it was a class that we had been offering as more of a seminar of this is a summary of graduate research experiences. So it was a class that was already existing, and we kind of rebranded or switched the type of experience that it was. It is an elective class within our curriculum. It's used to fill like one of those professional elective buckets. But collectively, the class as a whole, and in this case, we cap it around 20 students, conducts a research project. And in the world of animal sciences, usually that means it's a project either with animals or it's a project with like meat science or milk or something associated with an animal product. The structure of the class, the first 5 weeks is typically focused on preparing the students for the project. And so we have our compliance requirements in there. And so we talk about the ethical use of animals for research purposes, and they have to go through, one of their homework assignments is to complete all of the trainings. And then we talk about the concepts of developing a hypothesis, experimental design, data management. But the middle 5 weeks is really reserved for data collection. And so on Mondays, we meet in the classroom for an hour. And then this class is structured so that on Fridays, we're often out at the sheep unit, or we're in the meats lab, or we're in the milk processing facility, and we're doing our data collection during that time on Fridays. And that's when we would collect our data collectively. But then we would go back on Monday, the next, after the weekend, and talk about what did we find. And so we could go through some live things like, we have this one animal that's sick. Look, we can see that it's already an outlier. How should we handle that data point? And we could bring up some of the things that were occurring that you want to talk through as the research is occurring. And then the final 5 weeks after that research is conducted, we spend our time really working on disseminating the results. And so we do go through a little bit of statistical analysis and data interpretation, not incredibly deep. We're kind of like, here is SAS or R, and this is what it looks like. And by the way, here's an output. Now put that into a table and tell us what it means. Right. And so we spend more time at that point reading and interpreting research and writing and presenting research for different audiences. And so as we look at that, we talk about, how would we take this data that we have already and provide it and communicate it to a producer? What about to another scientist? What about to the public that maybe doesn't understand how or where we raise livestock or why we raise them the way that we do? And so we would use different examples that we have throughout the department of showing them even some kind of press releases versus all the way to scientific publications of the same data set to talk about the importance of communicating differently and translating that research to different audiences. Our best projects that we would design also had then spin-off projects. And we figured that one out a couple semesters in, is that collectively the class would do a pretty simple project. We call them feed them and weigh them studies. You feed an animal or a set of animals these diets, you see what happens by weighing them every Friday, and that's what, their difference in average daily gain or their difference in feed efficiency is what you calculate, and that's what the class collectively is working on. But at the same time, most of our animal research projects have additional response criteria that we're collecting that explain or maybe further describe why some of those changes happened. And we just don't have enough time, and not all students are at the level that they can really dig into that in kind of a course-based model. But the best projects have those additional response criteria that students can help collect, because that way, instead of just weighing the pigs, they also get to learn how to collect blood samples, and they learn how to collect fecal samples, one of the best days, right? And so all of the different things. And then they may not gain the direct experience of working with those samples, but we have the samples, so that if a student's like, man, this stuff is great, I really want more, it leads to a significant number of independent spin-off projects that if a student was involved on the front end, they can take some ownership, and we have the ability to do some spin-offs in a mentored type of environment, but that would become then their individual project. In our case, the biggest thing that we needed at that point, because we already had some dedicated faculty time to a class associated with it, is we needed money to run the project itself. And in this case, we were able to reach out to a couple of our different sponsors, and these were just typical funded research projects that we already were doing as part of our research program. Most of our teaching faculty also have a research appointment. And so a lot of times we leaned on those research projects, and the students would take a component of that. And then we were also very blessed to have Dr. Mark Young, who learned about what we were doing, and that at times we were limited in the number of students that we could take to professional or scientific meetings because of budget and the ability to pay for things like registration and plane travel. And so he has been making a contribution of $50,000 a year to our undergrad research program. And he really came to us for the most part. He was someone that the foundation had identified through his giving as someone that potentially had an opportunity and an interest in giving more, but not maybe to any purpose that he had heard about yet. And so they helped match him up with me, and I kind of said, this is what we're doing so far. These are some of our challenges. And he came through, and he came through in a pretty big way. And so that has been certainly instrumental in helping us grow the types of opportunities that we have. So then kind of back to the does it work? Certainly as we look at kind of that conventional model through 2016, where we were just trying to optimize the one-on-one mentorship basis, and we could move the needle a little bit, we have significantly been able to grow the number of undergraduates exposed to some type of meaningful undergrad research experience in this way. And so instead of having one or two, or maybe in a best case scenario, 3 undergrads working on one project with a single faculty member, we now have 20. And so just from the capacity perspective, that's allowed us to accommodate a lot more students. At the same time, it's helped us shift the distribution of when those students are starting to get exposed to research. And so we really encourage this course-based research experience to occur to freshman and sophomore-based years. And so that's really what our data is showing, that freshmen and sophomores are really our primary demographic for students who are doing and taking the course-based research program. Many times it's because they want hands-on experience with the animals, or they want to gain some lab skills, and that's their main motivation for joining the class. The fact that they're going to learn how to do research is almost a second thought in a number of those students. But it's also allowed us to better funnel students into the participant-based or the one-on-one mentored experiences, so that those students maybe understand a little bit more what they're getting themselves into. And they go into those situations with the knowledge of how to write an abstract, how to read a scientific paper, a little bit of like, oh, this is what a p-value means. And so that allows them to be more successful and have more intentional conversations with their research mentor. And then likewise, it's allowed us to grow the number of mentees that each of those mentors can accommodate. And so usually we think about it in this pyramid model, where a course-based research experience is great for almost all students, regardless of where they're going to end up. an independent research project is not always a great fit. And so part of what we want to do is funnel the right students to those research projects. But also we want to maybe make it less intimidating to conduct undergraduate research for the masses, so that you don't have to be planning to go to grad school and gain some research experience. And so that's really where a wider variety of our students and larger demographic would take the course-based experience. And then we would have a smaller segment that would be geared toward and really funneled into the independent research or one-on-one mentored experiences. For us, one of the biggest concerns was always quality, though. And it's really difficult to measure the quality of an undergrad research experience, right? So we actually played with this one a lot, where we went back and forth between, asking the students, do you feel like you learned it? And asking the faculty members to assess, do you feel like your mentee learned it? One of the things that we came across was a critical thinking score. So if you look at criticalthinking.org, they have a lot of different assessment strategies for critical thinking and the foundations of critical thinking. And we utilized their assessment and did this for about 5 years. So we have about 600 students in terms of data points of a baseline score, where they took that assessment before they conducted or took the undergraduate research course or conducted an independent research project. And then we had them take that assessment again afterwards. So we had a baseline and an end line. And as we look at that across, regardless of kind of the type of research experience those students had, we saw what we were hoping to see, I guess, which is that, we were able to, at least using this mechanism, this assessment, pick up a significant difference in growth or in end line score, whereas there was not a difference in baseline score between students that had conducted versus not conducted undergraduate research. But the bigger question for us was, does it matter what type of research? And so that's what this one looks at, is we were looking at baseline and end line scores, or that growth in score, depending upon whether a student had conducted course-based undergraduate research or the one-on-one mentored undergraduate research. And we failed to pick up any differences between students that had done undergraduate research but had done it different ways. And likewise, we have other assessments based on more of the Likert scale of, do you feel like you learned more? Do you feel like you captured, that you mastered any of these concepts? And likewise of our faculty mentors that we asked about their mentees learning, and all of the data also matches up with that, where we have certainly been able to demonstrate that undergraduate research increases their ability to think critically, but we've been unable to pick up a difference between the type of research experience that a student conducts. And so what we believe has happened, at least in our situation, is that we found a model that allows us to increase the number of students we can expose to undergraduate research without diluting the quality. We have seen this as a pulse certainly move through our program. And so part of it is we now have a significant number of credit hours being generated under the umbrella of undergraduate research. We generated, my numbers that I pulled were from 2021, a full year, and that was, we had increased up to 224 credit hours being generated. And so that allowed us to look at different use of faculty time and resources in terms of credit hours being generated and tuition and fee revenue. We also were able to grow the number of students completing undergraduate research as they were graduating. And so we, how many of our graduates conduct undergraduate research? We moved that from about 30% to over 40% over kind of that 4 or 5 year period of time. And then likewise, for us, a big measure is the number of graduates that attend either graduate or professional school. In the animal sciences, there are a lot of careers for BS levels, but there are also a significant number of careers for professional schools, so veterinarians, as well as graduate schools, so nutritionists, reproductive physiologists, and we have an increasing demand for our students in those avenues. And so as we look at that, we were really able to move from about a 20%, we had kind of been floating around about 20% of our students attending graduate or professional school for decades, really. And up through 2021, we were at 35%. Actually, we just got our placement numbers from the Career Center last year, it was 43%. And so we're placing more students into more graduate or professional school programs than what we were previously. So that's kind of what I wanted to present today. And it's not only working every department, but I do think that it's one that can be brought forward into a lot of different departments. We have other animal science programs across the country that are looking at this as a model of helping students get engaged in hands-on animal experience early on, and are looking at kind of replicating what we've been doing because of the success that we've been able to demonstrate. But likewise, when I look across the K-State system, I see a lot of opportunities where we have faculty that are phenomenal teachers, but are also doing research on the side or could be partnered with research faculty. And it would be phenomenal exposure for our students. So I'm happy to take any questions as a follow-up.
So Dr. Jones, I'll start with a question too. I see Sarah, you'll get a question as well, but the funding for these projects, you said you have a donors given 50 grand a year for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
If you could give us a list of people to call to, get them to fund similar things in our departments, that would be fantastic. I think it's awesome. The energy you have behind that, I found that really inspirational. So
well,
my question wasn't that serious.
But I will be the first to say it's not me. Right. So undergrad research is very sexy to funding agencies, right? I mean, so when you look at federal funding agencies, we know that they think it's great, but we would even, we started to get to the point where any research grant that we were doing, we would throw in another $5 grand for an undergrad research experience, right? And, it'd be like, oh yeah, we'll pay a student for the summer and maybe some travel to get them to a professional conference. We have never had a sponsor blink at that, right? They will try to negotiate tooth and nail over a $500 surcharge on something, but you throw the word undergrad research at them or student development, and there's a lot of interest in establishing and helping. And so that's one that's certainly on the funding agency side, we had found and have found a lot of interest in our sponsors, but also on the foundation side. I presented to the foundation board of trustees and to their fundraisers across all of the colleges, because they know that this is something that sells. And so I think that they've been looking for different faculty and different departments that can kind of take the lead and are willing to kind of champion something similar, because it is something that people like to get behind. And so it's a very fundable cause, in their opinion, at least. And I don't want to speak too much for them because I don't really understand the foundation world at all as a scientist, but they're wonderful at helping match the right people with the right opportunities. And so for us, I think we've been just shocked as a department about the support that really is out there, where sometimes it feels like we're in an environment that, we're always pulling tooth and nail to be really competitive with any dollar that's out there. And man, the undergrad research area, for me, I really feel like is one that there's some funding behind it, and it's pretty untapped at this point.
Thank you so much for that optimism. I like that. Sarah.
Yes, thank you so much for all of this information, Cassie. So my question is, it looks like this is a 2-credit course, a lecture, and then the labs on Friday. Do you ever feel like that's too little time, or does that feel like just enough time to cover this content?
Oh, great question. Always the same, right? So yes and no. I would love to have 6 hours, and sometimes it does take that much, right? So like what we expect from students as part of that is, especially during the data collection portion, sometimes we're collecting during that entire 2 hours, but sometimes we're not, because students might have, most of the time, like our students will have responsibilities to do chores. 7 times during the time that their project is occurring. And so for us, we wanted to block that time period, but we probably only actually meet on Fridays about half of those time periods. But that way it allows us to block that time period so that when we want to and need to utilize it, but then I have to make sure we're doing due diligence on the contact hour perspective, because that allows us, you know, most of our work occurs at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. When we've got to be out in the barns feeding animals and observing animals and animal care. So that's just a unique part of kind of how of animal science research. But in, you know, after having gone through it, I think we've taught now maybe 12 different sections of this class. And what's helpful is that we can increase the magnitude of it. So what we've been able to do in the past is have one lecture, because Monday lecture is really the time intensive part on the faculty member. And I could put 3 different sections. We did this last spring, actually. We had 3 different sections. So I had like a poultry section, a goat section, and a swine section. And on Mondays, they were all together. And I can talk about, you know, experimental design to, you know, in a lecture-based environment. It's not something that I need to be in a 1-to-20 ratio on. And so we can make that engaging, but still effectively deliver the content to 60 students. But I can't have all of those students in the barn with me at the same time, right? And so that's where we really started to rely on, and tuition revenue and fee revenue allowed us to establish and pay for some graduate students that then their master's thesis became basically the base of these undergraduate research experiences. And so now we have kind of a series of, we actually just hired our first faculty member that's a product of these, so I'm really excited. And so his master's thesis was built on 3 different species undergrad research projects that he led as a graduate student, but then he also managed kind of the undergrad portion and those 20 students, as well as all the spin-off projects. Because, like, you know, the undergrad portion, just the feed 'em and weigh 'em part, isn't enough to make a graduate thesis chapter, because you have to kind of make it, again, accessible for freshman and sophomore level. But with all the spin-off projects, there can be some pretty substantial science that gets conducted. And we were able to kind of partner those and package those so that, you know, we now have a program where most of my graduate students have mentored students through these. And then when they go and talk about their experience on the teaching side or their experience mentoring, they have this model. Texas Tech stole my other graduate student that was a recent grad. And so they're hoping to replicate the same thing. And so, yeah, as we look at that, it allows us to have that Monday lecture, but then that 2-hour lab component for us is enough time for a 2-credit class. And especially as we can kind of scale that model to put additional laboratories, and that means additional projects, and that means 20 more students or 15 more students, depending upon the project, every time that we can add additional levels to that. And so it made it more scalable, but still we were able to kind of keep a manageable control and a number of students so that the faculty or mentor to mentee ratio was still reasonable.
Cool, thank you.
Hello, Barbara.
LB.
Yeah.
Cassie, I'm just curious to know from your other faculty who teach in this course, what would you say was the most exciting thing for them in the change that they saw in the students?
So the feedback that we heard and have heard consistently is, and I'll approach it maybe from 2 different ways. I'll talk to it about those that have follow-up undergrad researchers, right? And so we certainly were able to see and have evidence of, as well as just kind of the hallway talk, right? That, man, these students come to us and it's almost like a filter mechanism, because they would have fewer train wrecks of potential undergrad researchers, right? Sometimes students have the best of intentions and start a project and get all excited, and then they figure out, I don't have the time, I don't have the interest, this isn't for me, and boom, it's done. And both the student as well as the mentor are disincentivized by that process, right? And so it kind of helped make sure that those students that were getting exposed to the one-on-one projects really understood what they were getting themselves into in terms of a time commitment. And so our faculty and our mentors from that perspective very much appreciated that, because they felt like they had a greater return on their time and investment. They had much more success with the number of students that they would bring in, that meant a significant number more of them would actually complete the project and then even go on to present it at other locations, or go on to other things. On the other side, as we look at classes where there's nothing to do with research, like, does this make students more engaged in the classroom? Does it? I'd like to think so, but I've never measured it. And so I'll answer that as a true scientist, right? I mean, I teach some of those upper level classes, and I like to think that, the reason that those students are asking such great questions is because they, now know how. I can't take credit for that. And we don't have a great way of assessing it. We're working on improving our assessment of student learning outcomes across our program. It's a work in progress. We need to get better at it. And so we don't have a great way of answering that question right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cassie.
So Cassie, what are some of the biggest struggles that students have in this experience, so that we can kind of get out in front of those and make these as successful as they could be?
For me, this is one where students are expected to, especially at an early stage, that freshman, sophomore stage, function independently and be comfortable with there not being a right answer at an earlier stage than maybe they're used to, or maybe that we have always focused on them in our program, at least. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is a struggle. And so I certainly have had to adjust as we teach the course, the fact that, the animals don't read the protocol. Sometimes we have a strong negative control and we have a strong positive control, and there might not be a statistically significant difference between the two, much less any of the other treatments that we're testing. And that's how research goes. And sometimes animals get sick. And sometimes, right, all of the things that happen in research that you have to make decisions about. But it flabbergasted me how uncomfortable students were with the fact that they couldn't Google the answer. Right. And so much of our content, at least especially at that freshman and sophomore level, what's the nutrient requirement of this animal? They can find that information online. And this is maybe one of the first times that students were confronted with, I can't find the answer. And we tell them all the time that answers change and there's not a right answer. Your ability to show us your thinking is there, but that is a very uncomfortable thing for students. And so, especially I think for underclassmen. And so that's something that we really had to adjust, but at the same time, put some very specific expectations in about assessment. And I don't know if this is a product of our environment or not, but we have a lot of pre-vet students that, right, their goal is professional school. And so they are very GPA driven. And if they do not have, this score in this class, it is a tragedy. And so, and we want them to be both thinking, but also academically successful. And I'd say those students, that demographic of students, were significantly more concerned about, well, how is this going to impact my grade? And it's like, this isn't going to impact your grade. You couldn't control whether the animals get sick, right? But just making sure that students understood their learning was being assessed, not the outcome of the scientific experiment. And that when a p-value is not less than 0.05, it doesn't mean that you failed as a scientist. And that sometimes some of our best and greatest discoveries occur when we don't find any answers, right? And so that for me was really important and continues to be a challenge to help students feel comfortable that if you do the work to an exceptional level, you will get a good grade, and help them have a safety net about how they're being assessed, and that, you know, they'll have a fair chance, but at the same time, help them become comfortable with the fact that who knows how the project's going to turn out. That's the fun part about research. And being able to play those together. But it certainly, especially the first couple of semesters, was an adjustment to help make sure that we had very clearly defined student learning outcomes and very clearly defined assessment times and strategies that students felt comfortable with, so that they were not intimidated by the unknown.
So I want to point out that some of those reminders those students need about those P less than 0.05 are things we need to remember as researchers as well. So
I know, right? Yep.
Those are great lessons. I got a question sent to me direct in the chat that I'll ask. The person asked, do students publish their work? And if so, are their first authors the professors, or how is crediting done?
Yeah, that is always a great question, because it's right. We're kind of in this weird area of what is scholarship, what is contribution to scholarship, and so that's one of the things we talk about. At the end of the research experience, so all students have the same data set, and then we lead them through the data kind of cleanup, as well as the data summary and interpretation. But ultimately, they end up with kind of this data table, and they have to develop an undergrad research poster, a scientific poster, and then present it at our research symposium. And some of their final grades are based off of their post. So they write an abstract, they have a scientific poster, and then their presentation, which is really just a 3 to 5 minute presentation, so a poster presentation. And we talk them through how to do that and all those different pieces. But each student is then primary author of their poster and their abstract. And we've published the posters and their abstracts in what's the K-State undergrad research, I'm gonna lose it now, New Prairie Press. Oh. Yeah, and so we've been fortunate to work with those folks that they can, so they're all citable. They can have a citation on their, you know, resume that they did this, and that is their research project, but they don't have to cite everybody in the class. The people that are there would be on that citation would be the primary author is the undergraduate student who wrote the abstract, the poster, presented it. And then secondary authors are graduate students, and then any faculty typically that are teaching or involved in the core project would be last author. And so as we're looking at that, that means there are probably 20 different, yeah, thanks, you're putting it out on KREX, thanks. We have, 20 different posters that are all the same type of poster, but it's really fun when you look at them to see what decisions students make about which data to present and how to display that data, and which data to not present, and how to display different forms of that data. But they're all kind of the same data set with their first author, and then the same set of kind of second through last authors. When we go beyond the university level, when we kind of go beyond KREX or beyond New Prairie Press, and we look at moving that to a different level, typically we select one of those students from the class and ask them if they're interested in presenting that at a scientific or regional meeting, or regional or national scientific meeting. And then they would again be the primary author. The rest of the class is not cited. Because again, what is scholarship, right? And so for us, they helped collect the data, and they did also gain skill sets, but that is not their abstract. It's not their poster. And so at that point, they really became, in terms of the research project, people that helped collect the data, not necessarily inherently involved in the representation of what that final product looks like. And so for us in our world, that's kind of the clear line for authorship. If you help collect the data, typically you're not an author. If you help intellectually contribute to the data, then you are. And so that's kind of where we've drawn that line. And students have, certainly if they're responsible for their independent project, if they're the one presenting that project at a regional or scientific meeting, they're first author. And then we have had 2 of those projects go on and be fully published. And in those cases, the undergraduate students are the primary author. like I mentioned, we have kind of our grad students involved now as well. And so once we, when we have situations like that, typically if it's like a thesis chapter where maybe there's a graduate student who's responsible over the course-based project, as well as all of the spin-off projects that collectively came together to make that one thesis chapter, that would be authored as the graduate student as primary author. And then any undergraduate that had independent projects, but the course-based students are not included in that. And so, again, I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way, but that's how we've decided to keep it relatively clean regarding authorship. And so that means we do have a couple undergraduates that have gotten primary author publications out of it. Certainly a lot, 20, 30, that have gotten primary author abstracts out of that published. And then we have about a dozen or so that are second through fourth authors on a scientific publication, depending upon their level of contribution in their spin-off project that then was later rolled into a thesis chapter that was published as a peer-reviewed scientific manuscript.
So I like that is an option for students as appropriate. And I like that you also talk about the ethics of authorship and those kind of things and what contributes to authorship. So I appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to remind our attendees that next week, Trin and I will be here to talk about care resources on campus. We'll also have a post-event survey that my colleagues have just dropped into the chat to give your thoughts on this one. And I want to finally thank Dr. Jones for sharing wonderful thoughts about undergraduate research in our event today.
Thanks, guys.
So the rest of you have wonderful days and happy teaching. It was good to see you.